Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're opening up old wounds by talking about Overwatch versus Paladins. Now this obviously isn't coming from thin air. Overwatch just came out recently-ish, and Paladins has undergone a ton of changes since the original Overwatch V Paladins debate way back in late 2016. So let's take a look through both and try to determine which of the two games is going to be best for you. And yep, on that note, going into this, I think the objective better game is Overwatch 2, obviously, but I personally like Paladins better, so I'm mostly just here as an enjoyer of both games to lay out my experiences with them and help you make a decision as to which game is best for you to potentially invest a ton of time into. I think the best place to start is with the core mechanics of the game, and I'm going to use Overwatch as the base as it's the more simple of the two games. To start off, queuing up, and here we already have a huge difference. In Overwatch, you select the roles that you want to play as, and you'll be queued. Once the queue pops, you will play as one of those roles, and are locked into that role for the match. As for Paladins, it's a much more basic system. You queue, the queue pops, then you pray to God you can play the role you want, and if you can't, well, better hope the rest of your team turns their screens on and makes a balanced team. This is in casual, of course, but ranked isn't much better. They let you ban away 3 characters on each team, and the person with the highest MMR is the person who gets to ban. If you can't already tell, this is very MOBA-like, and to be honest, I'm not a big fan. I almost always avoid ranked if I can in drafting modes like this, because it's just way too easy to waste time. Even Smite, which is developed by the same company, dropped the top MMR banning system in favor of letting each person ban one character because it just takes so long to wait for top MMR to just ban stuff. I get that they don't want 10 whole ass characters banned, but I digress. I like Overwatch's system way more. There's no rule queue here, so you just kinda gotta cross your fingers that you've been matched with flexible players who are more interested in a winning comp than playing their favorite character, who's always a low tier flanker, every time. So I know one very significant voice in gaming is against role queue. Dude. Like it or not, gaming has gotten way more competitive over the past 10 years, and frankly, role queue is just a product of that fact. Sure, I get wanting player-defined metas and such, but at the same time, it's always been half player-defined, because the devs are literally balancing the game anyways. It's always been the devs putting something out, and we make something of it. Role queue is admittedly a much more hands-on approach than just saying, here's some characters, go wild. But it was necessary as double tank was just called a crutch to make the game easier to balance or whatever, but role queue definitely feels like the way to go in a competitive hero shooter like this. Paladin's system isn't bad or anything. You could tell the if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but while the system isn't broken, I mean, do you really trust random people on the internet to make a balanced team? The worst you can do in Overwatch is play a weak character. In Paladins, one player can single-handedly lose a game or just generally make it way harder than it needs to be. I may have gotten a little ahead of myself though, since I didn't even mention what game mode you'll be queuing for. Overwatch has a whole slew of game modes available in competitive. Push the robot, control point, and of course the classic payload. And ranked, Paladins has just payload. The other two game modes being control point and your basic team deathmatch. Now, I understand why they have the payload as a ranked game mode, but I think the game would benefit a lot from both control point and payload in ranked. Overwatch is constantly shifting through tons of different maps, and to be honest, I don't think I've ever gotten the same game mode twice in a row, whereas Paladins is sat there with one game mode and frankly, not a wide variety of maps. So unfortunately for Paladins, I think it's another clear win to Overwatch. Let's talk about what happens when you finally load in though. In Overwatch, you pick your character, and that's the end of the sentence. Remember that in Overwatch, you pre-selected your role and can't choose characters outside of that role, so this super duper simplifies everything. In Paladins, you select your character in that pre-game lobby, and you're locked into that character for the rest of the wait, what's happening? Yep, here is the very hard to simplify loadout system in Paladins. Every character has 3 legendary cards which will heavily impact their playstyle, from things like giving them a faster ultimate charge, to adding effects to abilities, to completely changing functionality of some abilities. It's a really cool system, although as I'm sure you can guess, typically only one of these cards is considered viable. That's not all though. After that, you have to select your loadout, and there are some pre-made loadouts, each loadout corresponding to one of the legendary cards, but you more than likely want to make your own. And here's what that looks like, yeah. If you're new, you're probably not going to get the most out of this system. Almost every loadout I have was netted for someone else's, who's really good at that specific character, with maybe a tweak here or there. And since there's 5 individual loadout cards, all with their own stats requiring you to level and balance them out, it can be extremely difficult to figure out for yourself. There's a lot of preference built into this as well, but unfortunately, like the legendary cards, there's usually only 1, maybe 2 loadouts that you want to go, maybe tweak some levels here and there. Plus you can't make a loadout on the fly, so you have to do this in the menus before you get into a match. Well, okay, you have a legendary card and a loadout selected. Can we play now? Nah, you still gotta buy items. Yeah, on top of all that, there's a MOBA-like item shop in this game. Luckily, the store is very simple and has very easy to understand items, all with their own strength in certain situations. Similar to MOBAs, certain characters like certain items more than others, and the flexibility in builds only comes up here and there. You can typically just go the same few items over and over again, and it'll just be fine. But still, that's a lot to digest. But okay, you looked up what legendary card is best, what loadout is best, you got some good items, now let's go. Wait, what? There's a... Huh? Yep, Paladins has a mount system. Basically, anytime you leave the base, you'll be mounted, you can't use anything while mounted, and if you get hit by anything at all, you're taken off the mount. It seems pointless at first, but honestly it opens up a lot of interesting moments, like quickly flanking when the enemy team overextends after a fight, positioning yourself to dismount enemies before they get back to the point, stuff like that. It's a simple system that helps differentiate it from Overwatch, and it's something truly its own, even if it looks a little goofy. The loadout system is too, but I can definitely see the system, more so the loadouts, less so the legendary card, just looking like way too much for new players to deal with. Like, I just want to load up and play the cool looking person, not fiddle with a menu after menu after menu. So this one's definitely more up in the air, and it's really just down to your preference. Just like the other big difference that simply selecting your character creates. In Paladins, I mentioned that once you lock in your character, you are that character for the entire match. And that's the reasoning for the card, loadout, and item shop, to allow you to dynamically adapt your character for the current situation as required. And that's what makes it so complicated. Since there are so many different team comps all trying to do different things, you need all of these loadout cards and all these items to try and cover them all. Overwatch handles this in a completely different way. Not only are there no loadouts or items or anything of that sort, you're able to change your character whenever you want when you're in the spawn room. So in Paladins, you select a character and purchase items to try and counter your enemy. In Overwatch, your character selection itself is the counter. This makes Paladins and Overwatch completely different beasts when it comes to how the matches play out. Bad comps in Paladins are bad comps, whereas in Overwatch, each character is a rock, paper, or scissors to other characters in the game. Some characters are more than one of those, or sometimes all three, but more on that later. This is of course an aspect in Paladins too, and is part of the reason they do draft pick and ranked play, but it's to a much lesser degree. You can safely put together an entire diagram on what beats what in Overwatch, and honestly it makes complete sense. There are very blatant counters to most things in the game, and when things don't have a clearly defined counter or are just plain overtuned, they're usually considered overpowered. In Paladins, the balance is more about your personal adaptation of a particular character, creating loadouts that are for rushdown or maybe one that's more for survivability, then purchasing the right items at the right time to deal with your opponents. Whereas Overwatch tests your adaptation of, well, you. Having the decision-making skills to swap characters and swap them at the right moments, and of course maintain high levels of execution on a wealth of characters if you want to be effective in the slightest. So this is of course just personal preference really. The two ideas are essentially complete opposites despite the fact that the two games are of the same genre. I personally don't really enjoy the whole rock paper scissors idea on the whole, as sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, there's just some things in the game that just counter everything and or are just far too effective as counters. Yes, and asleep, I'm looking at you. Speaking of, well, looking at things, I'm a good writer, I swear. Let's just touch on graphics real quick, and I mean, yeah, do I even really need to say anything? Overwatch looks twice as good, and in my experience runs much better as well. The game is optimized to near perfection, yet it's still one of the best looking cartoony style games out there. Paladins looks passable, but lacks punch on anything colorful. The lighting system really just looks so unbelievably dated. I mean, nothing really looks like it's realistically capturing light, you know? It's definitely serviceable, but it does absolutely nothing better than Overwatch in this regard, and in some cases, it's a lot worse. Audio-wise, it's a similar story. Now, the sound design in Overwatch is a little inconsistent sometimes, like most non-ultimate abilities sounding like they're being cast a mile away, yet footsteps sound like they're straight from Jurassic Park, so it's not perfect, but whew, Paladins is a lot worse. So in a game where flankers are already strong, they just get elevated even higher. Non-ultimate abilities actually do have proper volume levels to my ear though, so that's a plus. But there's a clear but expected lack of crispness in Paladins sound effects. Overwatch is just so polished and clean in both audio and visual that it's really hard to match, but Paladins also has countless audio bugs. Announcers not saying their lines in time, abilities having mistimed sounds, primary fires being completely muted on occasion, and it's been a really messy experience. But speaking of let's speak about the speaking of characters that speak in each game. Voice acting in Overwatch is unreal. I mean, it really is. The most talented voice actors teamed up with the most talented directors. It's Disney level stuff. Well, good Disney anyways. Paladins is more of a mixed bag though. Every character does feel distinct however, and I do think if I had one thing to criticize the voicing on Overwatch it's that every character feels like it was written by the same person. One very talented person, but nevertheless it does feel a bit like there's only one general tone throughout. Characters of course have their own stories and personalities, but the way they act once you take away their cool voices and exterior are very similar to one another. Paladins definitely feels like it really is tons of different cultures and life experiences colliding onto one battleground, which in terms of both in-universe stories is basically what's happening. In Paladins there's a power struggle over the realm, and in Overwatch there's an ongoing struggle in the balance of power on Earth. And space and stuff too, it's pretty messy. It's too much to get into here, but I think Paladins 100% does this better. Don't get me wrong, those Overwatch cinematics are absurdly well done, but I can't help but get a whiff of superhero movie from them in a bad way. They're a good way to tie characters into the universe and give them some backstory, and to be clear, I do think Paladins kind of stole this idea and did it less well, but they are all skin deep, and I really don't pull much for them after the first time I watch it. Paladins isn't earth-shattering in this regard either, but it generally takes itself less seriously and can do more fun and interesting things with their story and characters as a result. Like Overwatch has hamsters and mechanical balls and monkeys wearing glasses. Shouldn't this be a little more fun and a little less overdramatic? Maybe I'm just childish, but I like Paladins' universe and characters a lot more. Speaking of things Paladins took from Overwatch though, let's talk about the characters in-game and how they play. Now, even as a big Paladins fan, I cannot with a straight face tell you they didn't copy some abilities and full characters from Overwatch. I know, Paladins was in development before Overwatch was even announced, allegedly, but I mean, come on. Kinessa is Widowmaker, Drogoz is Pharah except for the ult, Ruckus is D.Va with a different and more boring ultimate, Fernando is Reinhardt, even down to the close range primary fire and fireball projectile. To be clear, it's not as if Overwatch is original through and through either though. I mean, Genji is a ninja dude who throws shuriken and has a sword in his ultimate though, whoa! Hanzo is bow guy, Torb is turret guy, Soldier is boring, you get the idea. But Paladins had Overwatch, the very, very successful game to pull from, and it was a bit more blatant in their case than Overwatch's more general, here's generic character, fun now have please. But none of that really matters anymore because, to be honest, both developers have made it clear that they are way better at making characters when they're not drawing directly from other sources. Sigma, Yagoroth, Wrecking Ball, Sati, Symmetra, Caspian, and more from both games are so cool, and while they aren't all 100% never before seen ideas, they are still very unique and most of all fun to play. To me though, this has felt more often more impactfully in Paladins. Take Rey for instance, my favorite healer. Individually, her abilities are super simple. She can link herself to enemies and allies alike, and grant movement speed, give a massive burst heal, and has a heal that chains off targets. She's not rocket science. But put it all together, and you have a fast-paced healer who can zone off enemies and pocket allies depending on the situation. Sati, Amani, Ram, and Atlas are all really good examples of this too. And in general, it just seems like Paladins is way more willing to try new things. Admittedly, it's not with every new character, and yeah, it's Paladins, so new ideas aren't always executed very well, like Caspian's dual wielding, Kasumi's voodoo doll, etc. But it's nice to play a new character and see something that hasn't been done before. Like with Ramatra, you've got Sigma's right click, Doomfist's right click, Sojourn's E, and then only his left click is sort of new-ish. With Paladins, it's the opposite. You've got one, maybe two abilities that are similar, but then the rest of the kit is something fresh and new. So on the whole, I'd have to give characters gameplay over to Paladins, but there is that subjective part that's like, well, even if the Paladins characters are unique, you may just simply not like them, and that's fair too. So let's get into the fun stuff, the visual designs of these characters. Now this again is super subjective, but here's a good rundown of everyone. Paladins focuses on heavy fantasy and a bit of anime influence. Very little sci-fi here. There are elves and anthropomorphic characters abound. Plenty of, like people in there too, but the cast tends to be heavily varied, at least now. The stank of gruff person with gun does still reek from the game's earlier cast members though. Overwatch focuses more on anime and sci-fi, with anything breathing being very anime, and anything mechanical being super sci-fi and anime. Both casts have their fair share of I'm soldier and fight, but I'd have to give it to Paladins on the whole just because there's such a wide variety of beings. In Overwatch, the humans are just smart asses and or are edgy, and the robots are all very generic, oh he's secretly more human than the actual humans kind of characters. And I think it just makes me not like any of them. Soldier's a dick, Reinhardt's a douche, Morio's a bitch. I mean, I'd like to see at least one likable character whose likability doesn't feel forced down my throat. It goes back to what I was saying earlier with Overwatch characters just feeling kind of like paper-thin characters, whereas Paladins characters admittedly feel cartoonish and equally not as quote-unquote real, but are at the very least more fun to interact with. I mean, Paladins has got elves with giant asses, so my preferred option is clear. So that does bring me to a more divisive topic, but when I think of women in Paladins, I think of two letters. T and A. I hope I don't come off like a weirdo. Okay, I think we're kind of past that now, but anyways, I do think it's worth addressing. Paladins is sexualized to the nth degree. Now, Overwatch isn't exactly rated G either, especially with some of the Overwatch 2 remodels. Like, Tracer magically has an ass now, Widow has side ass, which is something I never knew I needed, but Paladins puts that all to shame on the regular. Not only are all of the women, graciously proportioned, even the ones that cover up are almost always given a skin that uncovers them, like every time. This isn't a complaint per se, but some characters are sexualized to the point where you can tell whether or not they, mow the lawn. So I think it's at the level where it might make some people uncomfortable or just find it exploitative. Speaking of skins, let's talk about them real quick. Skins don't really matter, but I'd say Overwatch skins tend to be a little bit better, but Paladins definitely has its moments too. Not to mention every Paladin skin is voiced unique of their original character too, so I think there's a bit more bang for your buck in that regard. That brings us neatly into monetization, how each game makes that money. Both games are very simple in this respect. Both revolve around having a battle pass, and then there are skins for purchase for the real life currency only in the store. This gets more layered as we go throughout the store though. In Paladins, you can't purchase directly most skins. Generally, skins are locked away exclusively in rotating chests. So yes, this does mean in Paladins, especially when you're new and don't have many skins, you're left with spend a little bit and try your luck, or really shovel over some cash and make sure you get what you want. It's very scummy and just generally lame. Overwatch isn't much better though, especially when it comes to new players. Every skin is at least $20, and while Paladin skins will often cost the same amount overall, at least you're receiving either other skins with each chest roll, or at least getting items that you'll never have to roll for again out of the way. Not to mention, Paladins actually does offer you opportunities to earn the in-game crystals through daily logins and quests, and there's even a separate store with rotating skins that you can use a different currency to unlock, and they're properly good skins too. So while Paladins is definitely convoluted and rather predatory, they do give you some options to grab skins other than Overwatch's fuck you give me money approach. This is also worsened by how you unlock characters as a new player. In Paladins, you earn in-game currency through matches and quests, get enough currency for a character, boom, you got him. It definitely takes long, and a very long time to get everyone, but at least you can choose who you want to pick. Overwatch has a set point that you unlock heroes at. They start you off quick with a character or match, but then slow down until you reach the final character unlock at a whole ass 150 games played. Neither system is great, but considering both games let you play any character in the training mode, it's not awful. But I think Paladins is a clear winner here, since if you're not grinding like an absolute menace, you could just do your daily quests, get huge sums of in-game currency, and unlock characters that tickle your fancy rather quickly. Again, if you're really slamming those long play sessions, Overwatch will reward you more. But I think the Paladin system is still going to work for more people. Then finally comes the battle pass, and frankly neither is great. The two passes are around the same price, but the Overwatch one gives you more stuff, most of which you won't ever touch, so that's a thing. The Paladins pass is shorter and therefore a bit more focused, and actually does give you a good amount of currency too. Some of the paid crystals back, some of that special currency for buying skins, and a ton of the base in-game currency that you can use for buying new characters. I mean, the Overwatch one gives you more stuff, so if you like the stuff in the Overwatch battle pass, that's the clear victor. But I think if you like the content in each battle pass equally, I think the Paladins one would take it since it gives you huge wads of currency to throw around. But that's definitely a bit up in the air. I think I'm biased since I just generally like the tone of Paladins more, and therefore I like the content I get more. So with this final transition, let's touch on the untouchable. So what are the communities like and how's the competition? So this is tough. Frankly, both games are very toxic, and in my Games of the Decade video a while back, I remarked that Overwatch was the most toxic experience I've had in online gaming, and frankly, I stand by that. But Paladins is no better, really. You get people who throw fits when you don't pick who they want you to pick, they get mad when you're not healing them, except I am healing you, you're just in the middle. You get the picture. I mean, you rock up to a PvP first-person shooter, you're gonna get some toxicity. It's expected. Again, this is all pretty intangible, these are just my experiences, but to me, the way each game presents itself is reflected in the player base. Paladins is a balls-to-the-wall, goofy hero shooter, but remains competitive thanks to not only decent amount of skill expression, but all that loadout and itemization and the minutia that comes with that. Overwatch has goofy things for sure, but for the most part plays it pretty straight and narrow, so that mixed with needing absurdly good matchup and map knowledge to make it anywhere in ranked and not just raw skill makes it very competitive. Not to mention Overwatch is just playing the bigger game. I mean, nobody has the exact numbers thanks to them both being crossplay and on different launchers on PC, but I'd wager to guess Overwatch has at least 5 times the player base, if not more. So frankly, if you want a more competitive experience, Overwatch is the way to go. If you're more just looking for a good time, well, I think it's really down to which gameplay loop you like better. Do you like being locked to one character for a match and adapting accordingly, or do you like the idea of trying to learn all these different characters and adapt yourself as a player? I think your answer to that question is the true deciding factor, as frankly, neither one is very nice to you as a new player, and neither one is going to be nice to your wallet if you ever happen to want anything from the in-game store. Although for me personally, I just prefer Paladins' more warm and fuzzy feel to Overwatch's more cold and clinical one. I mean, I still have bad moments in both games that just leave me hovering the uninstall button, but there's just something about Paladins that brings me back to it a bit more. Maybe it's the lack of overly harsh counters that are present in Overwatch, maybe it's the quest system, I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, both of these games are just vehicles for selling you stuff in the in-game store. But it just feels like Paladins actually cares about itself, and Overwatch is just whatever it needs to be to sell the most items possible. Again, not really tangible stuff, so I hope I explained myself well enough. And I hope you liked this video too. Which game do you prefer? And which one do you think is more inviting to new players? That's all for now, and thanks for watching. Oh yeah, I couldn't really find a place to talk about the maps without cramming it in, so I just left it for here. Yeah, Paladins maps are kind of bad.